Hilchas Mikvaos Perik Shlishi. Ve'elu chetzitzim bekelim. Hazefes v'achemer u'kiyetzibem. So zefes is tar and chemer is mortar. U'kiyetzibem, they are considered a chetzitza bekelim. In other words, when they're there in a place where you're makpid, so they're considered a chetzitza because the water doesn't get there. Now hazefes shebekez shebetzluchis. So mitoicham, if it's in the cup or in the bottle, is chetzitzin. It's always a chetzitza. Then you're makpid on it. However, me'achureim, if it's on the back of the cup or it's on the back of the bottle, so it's einam chetzitzin. Medvar mamurim, that on back of the cup and back of the bottle is einam chetzitzin. The beis uman, when you're taking it from the beis uman, so over there, so since the uman deals with tar, with mortar, so memela, the fact that there's some zephes or chemer behind the on the back of the bottle, on the back of the cup, he's not makbid. Avon balabais, when it's in a balabais' house, and knows over there he is makbid. So again, zephes and chemer are chtzitza. When are they chtzitza? So if they're in the beis uman, so only in a case in a tzleichis in the beis uman only inside, not outside. Mashenk in the balabais, sign the inside, sign the outside. Now that's talking about a case in a tzleichis. However, hazef is shebechtamchui shebekare. If we're talking about a pot or a large bowl. Bein mitechan, bein macharayim, bein balabayis, bein beis uman is chetzitzim. There's noch mal zefes and chemer, benegeh tamchui, and a kaira is always a chetzitzim, regardless if it's mitechan, macharayim, beis uman, balabayis. Benegeh case and sleichis, so inside it's also always a chetzitzim. Ashayim on the outside, beis uman it's not a chetzitzim, balabayis it is a chetzitzim. Halacha beis. Hamoir v'hakumas. Hamoir is translated as musk. Musk is from the salmon that we use for the Shemen HaMishcha, Meir, and kumus is referred to as being black earth. It's a certain type of earth which is very black. Mele, it's choitzitz. Is bein bekois, bein betzloiches, bein betamchui, bein kaira, bein balabayis, bein beis ha'uman, bein mitechan, bein macharem choitzitz. So notice, even though in Benigea, Zephes and Chemer, there was a difference between a kois and a tzleiches as opposed to a tamchui and a kedera, a tamchui and a kaara. That was a difference, and there was also a difference between mitechon and al gaban, and there was a difference based on balabayas. As far as meir and kumis is concerned, there's no difference. Whichever it is, we're talking about tzleiches, a kois, a kaara, a tamchui, a balabayas, or based on either way, it's always chetzitz. Hoya zefes echemer ukiyetseben ala tavla vala shulchan vala dargish. You had this tar or mortar that was either on a tray or is on a table or is on a dargish. A dargish is a stool. Is imhoyu nikim if we're dealing with these things that were clean, and therefore now all of a sudden you have some tar on it, some mortar on it. So chetzim because mipnei shemakbid aleim. Since we're dealing with a clean table or a clean tray or a clean dargish, so normally a makbid. However, v'ala blusim, if they're not clean, is then einam cheitzim, if they shein makbid alim. So be'etzim they prevent the water from going onto the table. But the question is if you're makbid or not. So if they're clean, you're makbid. If you're not clean, you're not makbid. Now, hoyu al mitas balabais, if on top of the bed, the talking about the bed itself, not the bedding, obviously, is chaytzitzim. However, al mitas shalani, the mitas of a ani is en chaytzitzim. I'm not sure how you establish a balabais and an ani. Whereas you have a balabais, a regular balabais. So I suppose someone that's not royal lekabel tzedakah. So he's like more balabatish mizaktis. So therefore it's chaytzitz. Mashenk and mitas shalani is enam chaytzitzim. Al ukav balabais, on the saddle of a balabais, is chaytzitz. It's considered a chaytzitza. If you have, again, we're talking about zephes or chemer. However, while zakokin are really those pouches that you put, you have pouches you put on the chamer. So those, and you hold water in there. So it's enam chaytzitz. Al hamardas is like a cloth or a cushion that you put on the donkey in order to put the saddle on. So al hamardas is mishnei tzdadim if the zephes and the chemer goes through both sides. In other words, if it's only on one side, it's not a chtzitza. But if it goes from both sides, then it's chtzitz. Halacha dalet. Hoye zephes e chemer ukiyetzeben al bigdei talmidei chacham. Afilu mitzadechot. Even if it was only on one side, it's chtzitz. Mipnei shemakpidin al mulbushan liyas noki. It's regular for talmidei chacham to be makpid on their clothes. They should be clean, so therefore they're makpid. However, al big the amaretz, so then if it's mishnei tzdadim, if we're talking about with a zefes chemer, which actually goes through on both sides, so maybe you have the chtzitz on both sides, so then it's chetzitz. However, mitzad echad is ein chetzitz. Now, hoyo ala mitpachish shel zavposim, v'shel yesiv, v'shel mefasli ilonis. In other words, you have a kerchief, a handkerchief, that belongs to people that deal with that deal with pitch, with tar, or v'shel yesim, people that make kalim, which are also dealing with all types of clay and mud, or shel mefasli ilonis, people that prune trees. So also there's normal that they get dirty. So therefore, the fact that they have zephes on this mitpachas is einam chetzim, wouldn't be a chtzitz. Halacha vav, tabach shoye dam al b'gadav, you have a sheichet which has blood on his clothes, and the chetzim, but it's regular for him to have blood on his clothes because he works with blood. Now mecher revav, shoye revav al bigdei, someone that was selling types of oils and fats that had like a fatty type of chtzitza on his clothes, is also in the chetzim. Because lepel again, it's just like someone that's a tabach. For him, it's not a chtzitza to have dam. So someone that's a mecher revav, it's not a chtzitza for him to have a revav al bigdei. Now hoya hatabach mecher revav, and v'hoya al bigdei dam urevav. He was say a tabach and say a mecher revav. He say was a sheichet and say he was selling fats. And lepel he had on his clothes say dam and say revav. So here is hariza sofik im chetzis mipnei sheim shnayim amakbid. Maybe since lepel there's two einachnami. If someone that's a tabach is not makbid on dam, someone that's a mecher revav is not makbid on revav. But someone that has both says makbid if there's two. Or maybe einach chetzis shari malachti v'eini makbid. So it's a sofik whether the fact that it's two causes him to be makbid, or since each one is something which is connected to his umness, so therefore he's not makbid. Now, hoya zefes eyachemer kietzim ala sandal, was on a sandal, is mitechi if it was inside the sandal, or milmailo on top of the sandal is chetzitz. Mashenke milmata if it was on the bottom of the sandal is eine chetzitz. Ala safsel if it was on a bench, milmailo menat stodim, a place which is visible is chetzitz. However, milmata if it was under the bench, so even though it's under the bench, it's part of the bench, but lapel it's not a visible place, so therefore eine chetzitz. Halacha tes. L'chluchei tzoya shebekisei v'shebekatadra ha'mechuboshim, spots of filth, which is either on a chair or a katadra. Katadra is a carriage which has a chair on it, which was normally carried by behemoths. So spots of filth that's on a chair or on a katadra ha'mechuboshim. Now the word ha'mechuboshim is the taich that they're cleaned. In other words, we're talking about clean ones. So b'pashtus you're makbid on it. Or ha'mechuboshim also would mean pressed in lichluch. So therefore, there's a concern that it's going to be have a chtzitza. So that would be the chiddush over here. No, l'chluch tzeiya shebekisei v'shebekatadra hamechubashim. Bein miteichon, whether the lichluch tzeiya is inside this katadra or inside, and on the seat of the chair, on the front of the chair, or bein mulmato or bein menatzodim, is anyway einam chetzitzin. Why? Because we assume that this lichluch tzeiya is going to come off with the mayim when you put it into the mikvah. If you have dregs, you have wine, so you have the spots of filth that comes from the dregs of wine, which was in the cup or in the bottle, or there's the soft material that you put into the necklace or that you put into the bell, or vahatit vahabotzek. There's tit, we're talking about tit that doesn't come off. We learned before that there was tit which is chaytzitz, the titayoven, and the tit which you find afilu b'mei sachama, or the titayotzim, so vatit vahabotzek and dough shal yada kordum or shal yada magrefa, which yada kordum yada magrefa is not as choshuv as, for example, the kardum, as the katadra, but nevertheless it's chaytzitzim. So the nukud is that in the first part of the halacha, the reason why it's not chaytz, it's not because it's not a thing that you're not makbid, but rather because it's bepashtus, it's going to come off in the water. And the reason why, in the second part, it is chaytz is because lepeil, it doesn't come off in the water. These are things that are not going to come. The lichluch of shmarim, now that is that the tit and the botzik are not going to come off in the water. And the mela and bepashtus, you are makbid, even though we're talking about the yada kordon and the yada magrefa, the bepashtus, you are makbid, and therefore the chaytz. Halacha Yud. Dover Borhu, Shekol Mokim Shamarnu Bezefis Ubecheimer Kietzvem, she'enam cheitzim b'kelim. So the reason is mipnei she'enam makbedu. And Rechemer and Zefes are certainly things which will stop the water from going through. So therefore, if you say that it's not a chtzitza, the reason why it's not a chtzitza is not because the water is going to go through it, because she'eni makbedu, because you're not makbed. Lefichach, since the reason is you're not makbed, so we learned before that when a rave of a keli or rave of a adam has a chtzitza, and you're not makbed, so midrabon, even though midraisa it's not a chtzitza because you're not makbed, but midrabon it is a chtzitza. Lefichach, over here also, im hoye rave a keli chofui, bezefes e bechemer kiyetzebam, is liosel tvila kamesha biyarnu. In other words, since lapel it's covering, in other words, it's a chtzitza. It's just that you're not makbid. So if this chtzitza, which you're not makbid, is covering most of the keli, so therefore it's not a proper tefillah. Aval b'shen makbid. Ein bedavar zer hefresh bekelim and akelim. Ela kol akelim shavim bedavar zer. All kelim have the same rule that if there's a roiv and any makbid, it's considered a chtzitza. Don't mitzias of a keli which you can have an any makbid and it should cover rave and still it shouldn't be a chtzitza. Halacha yudalef. Kol yodis hakelim shehin chalulim shehichnison shalei kedarkon. So we're talking about there's the two pshatim over there in this Mishnah of Emes. So some people learn that we're talking about a yad that's a non-functioning yad. In other words, that it's a not you put a handle into a keli and it's not functioning properly. So since it's not functioning properly, so therefore it's considered a chtzitza. That's how the Bartanura learns. Other Rishonim learn, but the Rambam in Mishnayos learns that we're talking about a handle that's hollow, like it says over here, shein chalulim, they're hollow, and the problem is that you want, and when you put a keli into a mikveh, you need that the water should touch the entire keli. So in other words, if you put it as like the next halacha yud base, if you're going to put a keli into the mikveh and you're going to push it down, in other words, the opening you're going to push down, so you could end up having the keli all the way down in the mikveh, but the water, because of the air in the keli, the water will never enter the airspace of the keli, and Mamela, the water didn't really enter the keli, so the keli wasn't really nitpal. So you have to have that the keli should actually be touching the water. So Aldero's over here, the chiddush is that also the yodis hakelim, if you have a yad of a keli, which is cholul, which is hollow, so that yodis hakeli also have to be placed in the way that the water should actually enter into the keli. So if you're going to put into the yad of the keli upside down, in other words, you're going to put the yad first. So just like if you put a keli, like again, halacha yud beis, you'll have a keli, a pot, and you'll put this keli down into a mikveh. So lapel, since the pot is full of air, and just placing it down, so the water won't go into the pot. The water will remain outside the pot. The air of the pot won't let the water go in. So al derech zeh, if you're going to put a keli which has a handle, that handle is hollow, and you're going to put it in upside down with the opening of the handle downwards. So again, that water won't go in. So you have to make sure. That's the point of this halacha. You have to make sure that the water goes into the handle. Halacha yudalef. Kol yodis hakelim shehein chalulim shehechnison shalei kedarkon. You put it in shalei kedarkon, which means you put the opening down first. Hechnison kedarkon, or even if you did put it in properly, abavlei mirkom, you didn't make sure that the water should go. You didn't make sure that the water should go through the entire handle. Or they were made out of metal, v'nishbaru, and therefore, as a result of this breaking, so the water doesn't really go through because there's an area in this handle which the water can go through. So I'll call upon the nekuda is that the water is not going through in the inside, in the hollow part of this handle. Is li'osalam tefillah, so the tefillah is not a proper tefillah. You have to make sure, that's the pshat according to the Rambam, you have to make sure that the water goes into the hollow part of the handle. Halacha yud beis, keli shehafach piv lamata vidbila. You took, let's say, a pot, and you started putting it down with the opening downwards, and memela, since you're putting it down with the opening downwards, it's going to press down, but the air is going to be in the pot. So therefore, the water is not going to go into the pot unless you turn over that pot and let the water go into the pot. So therefore, it's keilu leitavel. It's as if you weren't tabled the pot. The water doesn't go into all of it. If you have, let's say, an area in this keli, or the keli is made in such a way that even if you put it in a certain way, the water will generally go into the keli, but there's a certain part of the keli that the water is not going to go in. In other words, you have to make sure that the water goes into every part of the keli. So if you have an area in the keli, let's say a part of the keli that's sticking out, and therefore, even if you're going to put it in sideways, in other words, as we said, if you put in the keli straight with the opening downwards, the water's not going to go into the keli. Even if you're going to turn it to the side, there could be a hechatimtza that certain parts of the keli that the water is not going to go in. So therefore, you have to turn it over in a way that the water should go into the keli. Halacha Yud Gimel, keli shu tzar mikan, v'tzar mikan v'rachav me'amtza. So you have also a keli which has a narrow top and a narrow bottom, and in the middle it's wider. So the din is any tor actually atanu al sida until you turn it over on its side, and you have to make sure that the water goes into all of the keli. You know, it's not enough just to push it on its. In other words, to push it down sideways and memela assume that the keli was filled up. You have to be atanu al sida in a way that you have to make sure that the water filled up the entire keli. Now, tzloiches shapir shekeh. These all these dinim are the same yisod. That if you toivel a keli, it's not enough that the keli bechlolus is inside the water. It has to be that the water should be inside all the part of the keli, all the cavities of the keli, which is there. Even though l'chora you could be completely immersed in the keli, but lepegel, the water is not in that area of the keli. Tzloiches shapir shekeh. You have a bottle. That this bottle has the top of it is facing downwards. In other words, the lip, instead of the bottle just going upwards and mela finishing at a straight point, it's like it bent over inside, and therefore now when you pour out the water, you pour it out, it doesn't pour out straight. There's this part of it that goes behind between that lip that's bent over inwards and the outside bottle of the bottle. So you have this pia, which is shekeh, which is bent in. Now, mela, when you're going to go ahead and be toivel this keli, so even if water is going to go into the keli, but lav dafka that the water is going to go in between. Again, we have this part of the keli that's bent inside, so there's an area between the outside wall of the keli and that inside area which is bent in, which is the mouth of it, which is bent inwards. So tzloicha shapir shekeya. Ain't it tahira again? Actually, until you turn it on its side. And over here, just doesn't mean just to turn it on its side. You have to turn it on its side in such a manner to make sure that the water completely fills the keli. Now, kalmarin is an inkwell, which again, that inkwell also it had this pia turned inside, but over here it wasn't just turned inside on top. It was turned inside and very deep into the keli. And the purpose was that if it would be turned over, so the ink wouldn't be splashing out of the front of the keli, it would be rather gathering on those sides of the inkwell. So in order for it to contain it, it was in order to preserve that the ink shouldn't pour out of this keli. Is kalmarin, eina tahira, achi kvena mitzida. No, it's impossible for the water to get into all the places of this inkwell unless you make a hole on the side of the area, which is like, in other words, again, it's like you have the mouth of the inkwell that's going inwards, and therefore there's like a whole section in between that wall, which is turned inwards, and the outside wall of the inkwell. And in order for the water to get in there, it's going to be impossible that it's going to come in through the mouth of the inkwell. Just like the ink doesn't come out of the inkwell, so al derech zeh, the water is not going to go into the inkwell. And the only way it's going to happen is if you make a hole on the side of the inkwell, and that's how the water of the mikveh will go in there. There's nachamol kalmarin, which is an inkwell, and it has this mouth turned in very much, more than just like the halacha yudalit, which is tloiches shapir shekeh, which could only be shekeh on top, but this is actually shekeh all the way down. So it's einoteira ad sheyikonsu mitzidek, sheyikonsu hamayim la'akmum yishabeh, until the like the places which are in other words those rounded places which is behind the wall which is inside. In order for that to happen, you have to open a hole on the side. In other words, by the tzloiches shapir shekeh, there's an eitzah of yaten al tzida. As you turn it over in such a manner, you make sure that the water fills the entire tzloiches. By the kalmarin, it cannot happen. It could only happen if you kvena mitzida. Halacha tezayin behema shehoya ashir aleha rafui v'nitma. It has a collar, and that collar is makabel tumi because it's misham she'odem as well, in order to be able to move the behema, and it's loose. It's not tight on the behema, and it became tummy. So the din is matbil nesim kemi. You could be table the behema with the collar on it, and through that you don't have to take the collar off the behema in order to be table the collar. Halacha yud zayin liyad bil odem es akumkum bepchom shebei. There's a kumkum, which is a chinik, which has still coals inside the chinik to keep the chinik warm. So don't be toivel the kumkum with the b'chom shebei elim ken shivshiv. Because if the b'chom are still there, you have to move the b'chom in a way that the water should go all around. And memela, there shouldn't be an area in this kumkum where the water didn't reach. It's again the same din. Since there's the gecholim, so you have to make sure to move the gecholim that the water should reach all the areas in the kumkum. Halacha Yudches. Keli shehoya moli mashkin v'hidbile. Ki'ilu leitova. Now we learned that Bechlal, the only mashkin, oichlin or mashkin that became tomei, could never really become tor. The only mashkin that become tor is only mayim, and mayim is also not the gather of tefillah, but it's more of hashaka. Since this mayim became connected to the main mikveh, so it became bottled to the main mikveh, so therefore it lost its shem mayim of being a separate din of mayim, it became part of the mikveh, and therefore it's Torah. Now if you have a keli which is filled of mashkin, which is the mashke tomei, but I'll call upon him, it's not the mikveh. The keli is tomei, so obviously the mashke is also tomei. But the main point over here is not the fact that the mashke is tomei, but the fact that the mashke is not mikveh. And v'hidbile, and then you went ahead and would toivel this keli. So just like we learned before, that when you have a keli that you toivel in a mikveh, and lepel, the water didn't go into the keli. The water was just around the keli because of something about the keli that doesn't let the water go in. So therefore the keli is not Torah. So it's over here. You have a keli which is filled with water, and lepel, the water of the mikveh is not going into the keli because that mashke, rather, which is in this keli, is preventing the mayim of the mikveh to go in. Memela is kilu leitavel, because what has to happen is that the entire keli should be immersed in the mikveh, and that the mikveh water should fill the keli. However, if it was filled with water in it, and that water was tamidika water, now you are toivel the keli with the mayim, is a mayim ba'kelim terim kacha. So the mayim becomes tor, and the keli becomes tor, because the mayim becomes bottled to the keli. You know, regular mashke, not mayim, doesn't become bottled. So therefore, that mayim is preventing the mayim of the mikveh to be mitayr the keli. Mashenkin over here, if the mayim that the mashke that's in the keli is mayim, so the mayim becomes tor, becomes part of the mikveh. So the mayim has a tara b'mikveh, so it becomes part of the mikveh. Now hoya keli moli meiraglayim, the mayim, the mashke that was in the keli was meiraglayim, so that's also as a din of mayim, and therefore rei nesa kilu mayim, and it becomes bottled to the mikveh, and becomes bottled to the mikveh. Memela the keli is tor. Now hoya be mechatos, it had mechatos, it had water which you put efer adum on it. Now really mikra the din of mayim, mechat is also mayim. So therefore if you're going to put mechatos into a mikveh, it becomes bottled to the mikveh. But midrabanan, since it's mechatos, so therefore the Rabbanan said that it shouldn't have a din of the mikveh. In other words, even if you put it into the mikveh, it shouldn't have a din of the mikveh. So it depends. Im reiv hoya reiv akeli ponui kidei sheyirbu mei mikval mechatos shebeteche. In other words, you took a keli which had mechatos in it, and now you put it in the mikveh. Now you want to be matayr the keli. So it depends. If most of the keli was empty, so mele most of the keli was filled with mei mikveh. So mele the mechatos is miut. So it becomes bottled to the reiv mei mikveh which is in this keli. Nachmal im hoye reiv akeli poni k'dei sheyir b'mei mikveh al mechatos shebeteche is a rezator, so then the keli is tor. However, v'im lav, if the keli, if it'll pale, most of the mayim that's in, the mashke that's in this keli is mechatos, so memela there's no rave of mei mikveh to be mavatul the mechatos. In lav adayin hu betumase ukiilo hashar mashkin shechoitzitzin ben gufa keli ben mei mikveh. So the Rambam teaches is clear. So what's the problem of shar mashkin? The problem of shar mashkin is that they're choitzitzin ben gufa keli ben mei mikveh, which is the hemshech of what we're learning here. As we're learning the whole time that the water has to actually touch the keli, and if they're choitzes, in the cases where it was where it didn't go into the water didn't go in, or there was something about the keli that caused the water not to go into that area, so therefore it's not a tefillah. So over here also the water didn't go in because there's this mashka which is being choitzes, being gufa keli me'mei mikveh. Halacha yutes keli shetoichi tor v'gabi tomei. is you have a keli that only the back of it is tummy. Now that obviously is because it was nitma b'mashkin tmeim. Mashkin tmeim is b'chlal the whole din. The mashkin tmeim is metame a keli is a din d'rabbanan, and with the rabbanon it's only metame the back of the keli. It depends if it if it touches the back of the keli, so it's only metame the keli migabe. If it touches the inside of the keli, mashkin tmeim, so the whole keli becomes tummy. Masha'inkin, if the mashkim tmeim touches the back of the keli, a regular ksheris, for example, touches the back of the keli, the whole keli becomes tummy. But if mashkim tmeim touches the back of the keli, so only the back of the keli becomes tummy. Nachmo. Allah yites. Keli shetechi tor v'gabi tummy, which means it was nitma migabe through mashkim tmeim. V'hoyim molei yayin lovan echolov, and it was filled with white wine or milk. And the mele it becomes like something similar to the color of the water. It's not really so noticeable. It look like water. It's hil chanachar. So then you go also basarev. So now since this whole tum is only a din d'rabbanan, so therefore they were makel. And if the roiv of the keli is empty, so mele is going to come out, and most of it is going to be water. So the cholav or the yayin lavan becomes bottled to the water, just like we said before. Benegea the mechatas become bottled to the mikveh water. Im hoyerev keli ponet kedei sheyir bo hamayim b'techis tor. Why? Mipnei shetumasim dereim. Since this whole din of tumah, when it's only tummy migabe, is obviously only a din d'rabbanan. So therefore they were mekel, and if roiv of this keli was filled with mikveh water, so the mele this keli becomes tor. Aval hoye beyayin odim shar mashkin. That's only if it has white wine or cholov, which becomes like bottled to the water. It's not so noticeable. Masha'inkin, if there was red wine or shar mashkin, so even if it was a miut, so it's leosel tefillah because it doesn't become bottled to the mikveh water, and memela it's leosel tefillah because it's a tzitza between the mikveh water and the keli. Halacha chaf. Login shahayim moli mayim tmeim. You have login, which is bottles that are filled with water, which is tummy. The login are tummy, the mayim are tummy. And v'haya al piv tit tefech. And on top of it, you have mud, which is wet mud. And really, is this wet mud is not really a chtzitza. It's not really a chtzitza. But in order for the water in the login to become bottled to the mikveh, so that tit tefech has to be shekeah in the water. And if the tit tefech would remain on top of the login, and it would be like, so to speak, a separation between the mikveh and the water in the login, that would be a problem. But over here, login shayimali mayim tmeim, v'haya al piv tit tefech, and there was like wet mud on top. V'haya tit shekeah b'mayim, and the tit was sinking in the water. It was sinking in the water which was in the login. V'hidbile, and then you went ahead and would toivel the login was started. That's talking about if we're dealing with tit tefech. However, v'imhoya tit hayoven ukiyetzebei, but if the tit was a tit which really cannot become bottled to the mikveh, tit hayoven is something which is chaytzitz and it doesn't really have a din of mikveh water, mele can make a chtzitza, is ki'ilu leitavel, it's as if you were on table. In other words, even if the tit hayoven is shekeh b'mayim, but lepel, since the tit hayoven is shekeh b'mayim, so it goes down into the login, and mele it's chaytzitz from the login. So therefore, it's imhoya tit hayoven ukiyetzebei ki'ilu leitavel. If you have a login, it's filled of mayim tmeim, so if it has titefeach on it, and that titefeach is shikeh b'mayim, and you are matbel, it's beseder. Mashaykin, if that tit was titayovin, even though it was shikeh b'mayim, but lepel is not beseder because lepel is a chtzitza. It's a chtzitza because it's going down into the bottom. So the it's a chtzitza between the mayim and the login. V'chein tabas shenosna b'lveina shel titefeach. Just like we're saying, the titefeach is not a chtzitza between the mikveh water and the login. So the same thing, if you have a tabas that you put into a brick that's made out of titifech, you know, you have like a brick made out of titifech, and with bila you will toivel the whole brick of titifech with the ring inside of it, is tahira, so the ring becomes tor. How that's talking about if it's titifech. However, if in tit yovin, but if it was tit yovin, so that would be a chtzitza. It would be a separation because the titifech really has a din of mayim. Remember, the titifech has a din of mayim. So therefore, v'imhoya tit yovin, if it was tit yovin, is kilo litavla, it doesn't have, it's as if he wasn't able. Because the pill, the water didn't reach the tabas. Halacha chafalef. Elu she'en tzrichim she'yoveu hamayim behem. These are things that we're saying, till now we're saying these kalim need that the water should actually reach. But there's certain times when you're toivel something, and there's certain parts of the thing that you're toivel that the water doesn't actually have to reach every part of it. What is that? Stam kishrei bigdei aniyim. Poor people, so if they have a rip and they want to like correct the rip, so what they would do is they would make a knot, and there's a knot on this piece of cloth, and that would, so to speak, close off the rip. So generally, a poor person is not makpid. That's a regular way of life. When a person has a rip, and then you want to close it, you'd make a knot on it. However, even though he's a poor person, he was particular about his begodim, and therefore he was makpid the fact that it's this kesher, and in his mind he wants to go ahead and correct it and take out the kesher and mend it with sewing, is chaytzitz. So now this knot is chaytzitz because lepel he is makpid. Now, big de balabatim is fakert. A regular balabas, not a poor person. So that person, if he has a kesher on his beged, so is staman chaytzitz. In the pashtus, we assume that he doesn't want to keep it there, and therefore mistam it is chaytzitz. However, if he's not makpid, is einam chaytzitz. The kishrei nimi abgodim shenikshur mi'aleim. The nimi abgodim are the threads that come out of the shesi, and they are the threads. You have when you start weaving the shesi, the chuti shesi. So you don't start all the way on top. You go a little bit down. So mainly there's still threads of the shesi that are sticking out, and those nimi shesi got tied up by themselves. So it's not pshat you have any intention of reopening it. It's tied up. It got tied up by itself. And b'pashtus, that's how it will remain. Or the chevet hasandal. Chevet hasandal is also, we're talking about like a loop that you tie onto a sandal, and on that loop you're going to put in the shoelace. So that loop is there to stay. You want the sandal to stay. Or a tefillah shoresh. You have tefillin, shun feresh. Bizman shat aktzitza dvuka im haritzua sheba v'chazoka. So notice you have the ritzuas that are going through the mabart of the tefillin shoresh. So you can have a mitzvah of a ritzua which moves very easily. So therefore you have to make sure that the water goes into that area where the ritzua is. When you're going ahead and being toivel, tefillin shoresh can be makabel tumah. Tefillin can be makabel tumah. It's a keli. So therefore, when you're being toivel the keli, the question is: does the water have to go through in the place of the mabarta, inside the mabarta? So if we're dealing with a place where the ritzua moves in that mabarta, so therefore that's an area where the ritzua is not there to stay. It keeps moving. So therefore that area has to be filled with water. Masha'inkin, if the ritzua is steady over there, it's very firm over there. So therefore there's no reason to move it. So that's the way the tefillin is. So therefore you don't have to get the water inside the mabarta. Again, where there's the mabarta where the ritzua goes through. Does the water have to be in that area? So it depends. We're saying that tefillah shoresh bizman shaktzitzu dvukim haritzua sheba v'chazoka. So then we're saying, so since over there this ritzua is there to stay, so therefore you don't need to get any water in that area. And also tefillah shel zeya bizman she'ena oila v'yeredes. Tefillah shel zeya, I'm not sure. Vice is a difference. That benegeya the tefillah shel zeya, the tefillah shel yad. So if it doesn't go up and down this ritzua within the mabarta, again, so we say that it doesn't need to be. You don't have to get water in that area. And also va'ozne hachem is vaturmul. Va'ozne hachem is vaturmul, which you have like a pouch, a pouch of leather or a container of leather, and that has like handles, and those handles are tied to it. So again, so they're tied to it in a way that you're not moving it. You want it to be there. So therefore, so all these things, all these types of knots, which you have no intention of untying it, so therefore the pashtus advarim is that they don't have to be untied. You could be toivel it without untying it. So again, so we spoke about the knots in a beged, so it depends on niyim and ashirim. In other words, by anim, the pashtus is that he has no intention of untying it. But if he does have an intention, so then it is a chtzitza. By a balabatim is fakir, the pashtus is that he does have an intention of untying it. But if Beferish doesn't have an intention, so again, it's not a chtzitza. And then we spoke about things that are bepashtus, not a chtzitza. He has no intention of untying it. He spoke of nimi abgodim, and al derez the chavata sandal, and al derez benegeh the ritzua of the tefillin shorosh and of the tefillin shoyad, and also benegeh the ozni achem is vaturmus. All these things, since the pashtus is that he has no intent of untying it, so therefore it's not a chtzitza. Halacha chav beis ve'elu shetzichim sheyoveu behem amayim. These are the things that you need that the water should come into it. Haksharim shebepischei chaluk shenasuin lulois. Whereas when you have you have a shirt or a robe, that in the front you have things to close the robe together, and they're made into like loops. They're made into loops, but I'll call upon them. You tie them, and the intent is to untie them in order to take them out. V'chein kishri luloy because of the same type of thing that you make loops to connect the two sides of this robe, for example, the two sides of the shirt on the shoulders. You have a part that goes to the back, a part that goes to the front, and you connect it together with some type of a loop, which you make a knot. But the purpose of it is to eventually you'll untie it and then you'll take it off. So that's v'chein kishri luloy shebekosiv, or v'sofishal sadin. If you're being tovel, let's say you have a sheet, so the sheet could be crumpled up. So there'd be a concern that maybe not all the water will come into the sheet, and not all the areas of the sheet will get water in it. So v'sofishal sadin, the edge of the sheet, tzarich l'matech, it has to be spread out to make sure that the water reaches all of the sheet. Or a tefillah shoresh, bizman she'ena kvor b'ritzur. When you have a tefillah shoresh and it's not kvor b'ritzur, the ritzur that's not in there in a way of a steady way, or v'shel zreya bizman she'ela v'yeredus, when the ritzur is going up and down within the zreya. So these things are also, so since they're not really steady inside there, so the water has to get into the place inside the mabarta. The place where the ritzur is has to have water coming into the entire mabarta. And the shanson shel sandal, shanson shel sandal are like the laces of the sandal, which you connect to those loops that we spoke about in the previous halacha. So the original loops that you put in the sandal, you put in there to stay. Mashenk in the shanson shel sandal, which is certain laces that you connect to those loops, so they are there to tie and untie. And also the kishrei nimun abgadim shekashra, when we're talking about those nimi abgadim, those threads that are coming out of the chassis, and you went ahead and tied them up together, so presumably you tied it with the intention of untying it. If it was tied by itself, the passages, you have no intention of untying it. But if you tied it, we could assume that you have an intention of untying it. He's either going to reveal it, in other words, open it up, or so therefore, that's the rule. The rule is if you have an intention of untying it, so therefore you need to untie it in order that it shouldn't be a chtzitza. Masha'enkin, if your intent is to leave it as is, so that's the way it is. So since that's the way it is, so therefore there's no need to untie it, and you could be toivel it as is. Hasalin shel gas v'shel bat, the baskets of a wine press or an oil press. In those baskets, you'd put in, after you press the wine or after you press the oil, you take what's remaining of the grape or of the olives and you put it into the baskets, and then the wine or the oil would drip from the baskets, and that's how you would get the residue of that oil. Now the question is, now you want to be toivel that basket. Now in that basket you have the residue of the you have what's left over of the grapes and of the olives, and the question is it going to be a chtzitza when you're going to go ahead and be toivel it? So I say, if they were strong, in other words, we're talking about a strong basket, and also has very small holes, so therefore, those holes become really stuffed when you have this leftover of the grapes or of the olives on it. So in order to be able to be toivel this basket, you have to poke at these things to make sure that it doesn't stuff the holes, and therefore only when it doesn't stuff the holes, that's when you could go ahead and be toivel it. You could be toivel, but as long as it's not stuffing the hole, because if it's stuffing the hole, so the it's going to be a chtzitza. However, in hoyurafin, if they were loose, in other words, they were larger holes, and therefore they were rough and they were loose, so in all you have to do is shake. In other words, when you put this into the mikveh, so you have to shake the baskets to make sure that everything moves, and therefore that the water should reach all the areas of the basket. Hakar v'keset sholeh, when you have a pillow or a long pillow or a round pillow, and we're talking about that it's a pillow that's open, which means you put things into the pillow, you take things out of the pillow, is tzrichim sheyaveu ben hamayim, the water has to get into the pillow. In other words, you have, let's say, a leather pillow, so you have a leather outside, and then inside you put in soft material in order to have a comfortable pillow. But lepel, you have to have that. The water should go inside this pillow in order to be toivel it. Now, keses agul, if you have a round keses, and that kesses is already closed. In other words, you rounded it, and now you closed it. Or v'hakader, you have a ball, and that ball also has an outside material, and then inside you filled it up, but you closed it. Or v'ha'imum is something which you use in order as a form, and it's a form to, let's say, make a piece of a shoe on it or whatever, but it's a form that has an outside to it, and it has a stuffing inside, and that outside of it was closed up. In other words, it has the stuffing inside of it, but you have no intention of opening it up and taking out the stuffing. It's there to stay. Or v'hakameya, kameya is also, you have a kameya, and that kameya is inside a kiss, let's say a leather kiss, but again, it's closed, not in the way that you're taking the kameya in or taking it out. Or v'atfil, as we know, tefillin, which you put the parshas in the tefillin, and the tefillin is closed, is einan tzrichim sheyaveu hamayim l'chalolim. The water doesn't have to come into the inside of it. And since we're dealing, even though it does have an inside, but lapel, since it was closed up and whatever is inside is there to stay, you're not taking it out. So therefore, the water doesn't have to come into the inside. Zaklal kol shein darke leitz ulachnes is table sasim. If we're dealing with something which you're not going to take out and put back in, but it rather remains as it is, so you table it while it's closed. Halacha chavdalit. Hamatbil begodim hamechubasim. A person is tabled clothes, and those clothes were washed, means that they were still wet. You're putting it into the mikveh while they were still wet. Now, lapel, we're talking about you're putting in clothes, which let's say is folded, and between the folds there's like little air bubbles. So the question is, when you put the clothes in, you want to make sure that the water went into all the clothes, that all of the clothes was like the. In other words, if there's like if you have a folded piece of clothes, it could be that in the fold there's no the water didn't come in. Now, what happens is that when you put the clothes into the water, so because the air bubble, the little air that was in this fabric or in the between the fabric, so that air goes out of the water, so it creates bubbles. So hamadbul begodim hamechubasim tzrichim sheyikonsu b'hem hamayim ad sheyivabu. The water has to go into this clothes. In other words, the water has to go through all of this clothes to know that all of the clothes touch the water until that there started coming out air bubbles from the water, so you know that the water reached the areas where there was air bubbles, there was air. Now hitbila, that's talking about if you would tovel it when it was wet. So as long as you know that the water got there, you don't have to worry that the water actually saturated the clothes. The water of the mikveh saturated the clothes, because since the clothes were wet anyways, so even if the water of mikveh didn't saturate the clothes, but lapel, the water of the mikveh became connected to the wetness of the clothes. What you have to just make sure is that there's no air bubbles in between layers of the clothes. So once you see that the air is coming out of the mikveh, so as you put the clothes in and then you see bubbles coming out of the mikveh, you realize that the water penetrated in between the clothes, and mele, any air that was there went up, and that's it. And mele, even if it didn't actually saturate the clothes, is also beseder. However, hitbila nekuvim, if you tovel the clothes while they were dry, so then it's not enough that bubbles started coming out of the mikveh. It has to be actually yavabu. The bubbles start coming out of the mikveh, and then v'yanucha mibabon, and it stops bubbling. So then you know, when it stops bubbling, you know that the water not only came in between the clothes, but the clothes were saturated with the mikveh water. Whereas the bubbles also come from the actual clothes. In the clothes is trapped air pockets. So memela. So when we're dealing with a wet piece of clothes, we're not worried about the water of the mikveh saturating the clothes, because the clothes is wet and it's touching the mikveh. So mele is beseder, because that water becomes connected to the mikveh. Masha'inkin, when we're dealing with dry clothes, we have to make sure that the water actually saturated the clothes. So therefore, you need that not only it should make bubbles, but also sheyibabu and also v'yanuchu mibabun. It should stop from the bibble. Halacha chafei. Kol yodis hakelim shenaruchim yesim k'dei tzokon. If you have a handle of a keli which is longer than necessary, and va'asud l'keitzam, and eventually you're going to cut off this handle, you're not going to leave it as is matbilon ad mikei mamita. All you have to do is be toivel it to the place where it's necessary to have this handle. Whereas the rest of the handle, which you intend on taking off, so therefore it's not really part of the keli, so therefore it's not worrying about it. Keitzad, shalshelis, dli godel, if you're talking about the chain of a large dli, so really you can't hold it so far, it will be too heavy, so therefore it's arbot tvachim. The shalshelis can only be 4 tvachim. That's how much you need for the dli godel. of a cotton. If you have a small gli, so then you can have a sorah. So matbul min shalshelas ad midazu bilvad v'ashar tor. So if let's say you have a longer shalshelas and you have an intent of cutting it, so then we say that all you have to do is be toivel if it's a dli godel 4 tvachim of the shalshelas, if it's a dli cotton 10 tvachim of the shalshelas, and the rest of the shalshelas you don't have to be toivel because that's not considered part of the keli. That's not considered part of the keli. Now the question is, l'chura, since there's the rest of the shalshelas and you intend on taking it off, so why isn't that like considered a ichtzitza to the tip of the shalshelas? No, the part of the shalshelas which is part of the keli, l'chura would normally have a tip. If you would have cut it off, there would be a tip to it, and that tip also has to be getabled. Now lepel, that tip is being covered by the extension of the shalshelas. So there's a dion. Why is that not considered a chatzitza? The nekudas advarim is that if the reason why you want to take off the outside of the keli is for the purpose of the other part of the keli, knows the reason why you want to take off the extension of the shalshelas is because you don't want it, so to speak, to cover, knows it's l'tzorech of this part of the shalshelas which you do want, so then that would be considered a chtzitza. Masha'inkin, the reason why you're taking the extension of the shalshelas is not l'tzorech of the shalshelas which is remaining, but rather l'tzorech of that extension, so then it's not a chtzitza. Halacha chavov. Kli tami, shenosan b'toichi kelim acherim. You have a kli tami, and then a large keli tami, and then in that keli you put in other kelim which were also tami. And v'hitbul hakelim, and then you would table all the kelim, inside the outside keli, inside the inside kelim, is also a tefillah, so everything becomes tor. Aval pi shepia keli tzar b'yesi, even though the mouth of the large keli is very narrow, and therefore there's no really amount of, not a lot of water that's extending, so to speak, between the mikveh and the water in the keli. There's no shviferes haneit, but nevertheless, shari hamayim nechnasen lei, u'mitech she'olso tefillah l'klei hagodel, also tefillah l'keli shbetechis. So the water did go in, and obviously the water didn't go in, so it can't become toivel. But we're talking about the water went into the keli hagodel, even though there's no big mouth, and since that water is being matayr the keli hagodel, so it's since it's being matayr the keli hagodel, it's also being matayr the other kelim which are inside the keli hagodel. Now, v'im hito al tzidei, this if you put the keli hagodel on its side, and the keli hagodel is not really in the mikveh, it's not really in the mikveh, it's not completely immersed in the mikveh. In other words, the small kelim which is in the keli hagodel are immersed in the mikveh. But the keli hagodel is not really completely immersed in the mikveh. And v'hitbel, and you went ahead and you were tabled the small kelim in the keli hagodel. Lo also have tefillah. The tefillah didn't go for the small kelim. Ad sheyeh piv rochav kishviferes haneit. So there has to be a connection. In other words, what's happening is when the whole big keli went into the mikveh, and therefore the big keli became toher. So while the big keli became toher, so all the other kelim inside also became toher, regardless of how much water. What was the size of the mouth of the big keli, which was letting the water of the mikveh into it? Masha'inkin, if the big keli didn't become immersed in the mikveh because he told al tzidei, so now what's happening is that you have like a keli that's inside this mikveh, and there's water inside this keli, and that water inside this keli is being connected to the mikveh, and through being connected to the mikveh, so that water inside the keli is going to be matayr the small kelim. So that connection has to be that we'll learn the hamshach, that in order for water to be connected to a mikveh, it has to be rochav kishviferes hanut. So therefore, we're saying v'mito al tzidei v'hitbel li also lam tefillah ad sheyeh piv rochav kishviferes hanut. It'll be the size of a kishviferes hanut. Which kishviferes hanut means the straw that you'll put into a noid. A noid is a pouch of leather, which is 2 etzbois that you're able to turn 2 etzbois. That's the size of shviferes hanut. So that's the din. If you weren't toivel the outside keli, so in order for the inside keli to become tahirim, it has to be that the opening between the outside keli and the mikveh is kishviferes hanut. V'cheinem hoya keli tor, and v'nosan l'techi keli t'meim v'bilom is also le'osalem tefillah. Same idea, even if the outside keli is completely immersed in the mikveh, but since the outside keli is not becoming tor, so therefore, the water that's in the inside and the outside in the keli is not really being matayr the outside keli, because the outside keli is mulchatchila tor. So therefore, that water is not matayr the small kelim inside the large keli, unless there's enough of a connection. Le'osalem tefillah sheyeh piv rochav Kishviferes Haned, the mouth of the large keli has to be connected to the mikveh Kishviferes Haned. Now, Bamedvar Mamurim, that Kishviferes Haned is going to help, or the fact that the outside keli is Tomei is going to help for the inside keli, if it's not Kishviferes Haned, that's Lutruma. As far as being able to be Torah, to be able to use it for Truma, so that would help. If it's Kishviferes Haned, it would help. Or even if it's not Kishviferes Haned, if the outside keli is coming tired, so it also helps. Aval Lekedish, if you want to be toivel the inside, the kelim that are inside the large keli, Lekedish, ein matbilun kelim letech kelim terim klal. You can't be, I'm sorry. If we're dealing with kelim that are tmeim, so even Lekedish would work. Masha'enkin, if we're dealing with kelim that are not tmeim, but teherim, and now you want to use Kishveres Haned, so now we say, ein matbilun kelim letech kelim terim klal, bafilo besali bekupik mishabianu l'maylim kemi. Again, if the outside keli was tamei, so even lekachim would work to be matayr the inside kelim. Mashenkin, if the outside kelim was toyer, and you want to be matayr the inside kelim based on the idea that there's kishviferes haned, it doesn't help. Lekachim, you could never be toyvel a keli v'tech keli, even if it has a side kishviferes haned, even if it's a sal or a kupa, which is obviously much more than kishviferes haned, you can't be matbul kelim and b'tech kelim klal.